And here we are at Dan Pearson's landscape. A very neat native plant space, been under development for a number of years. And we're going to talk to Dan and let him show us the landscape today.
Hi.
Morning, Dan.
Good morning.
So tell us about the front yard.
Well, this is actually the spot where I waited the longest to do any plantings on, because I wasn't very confident in my design capabilities. But luckily we had Wild Ones give us an installation here, and they did the design. Rob May did the design on this.
So this was a grant from them?
Yeah, well, it was like their landscape challenge that they do every year, and so this I built the hardscape for it, and then they provided all the plants and volunteers to help install them.
Excellent, excellent. Well, tell us about what you got here.
Well, so this rather substantial cluster here is the gray-headed toad flower, which is a very long bloomer, and is very easy to reseed. So that's the only drawback. You're going to find it popping up wherever it reseeds. And there's also quite a bit of fall late onion here. There's rose verbena. This stuff here is mountain mint. And these fall glade onions will bloom in the late fall or the late summer to early fall.
Excellent. So what's the conditions like here? Is this full sun or?
This is this is probably one of the sunniest parts of our landscape, even though it gets quite a bit of shade still. So it's probably partial shade.
Okay. So
like this is the time where it gets shade, and then later on in the afternoon it gets a lot more sun.
it does get direct sun then in the afternoon. So this is a corner. This is
When they redid all of these sidewalks, I had to figure out what to do with the soil, and the tree lawn had been pretty much diminished beyond any value. So I planted this partridge pea. I just cast seeds in this area as a nurse crop, because it's a nitrogen fixing plant, and it will help restore the soil, the nitrogen in it. Pollinators love it. It's just now starting to bloom, but in a week this will be like a pretty solid carpet of yellow flowers.
that's a really pretty plant. Where did you get it? Did you have to do anything special to find the plant?
No, I actually ordered seeds from Missouri Wildflower Nursery, and they sent them in the mail.
Okay. Excellent.
This is a serviceberry tree that the city planted for us after we took down the calorie pear that was here previously. So then over here, part of the Wild Ones Landscape Challenge was this. This was included. So this is all Prairie Dropseed. With the exception of this here, I added a little bit later. This is Rough Blazing Star, and that's a really great pollinator as well. Will start blooming in a few weeks.
Excellent. Well, let's look at another part of your yard.
So this was an experiment that I started a few years ago. This is leather flower. It's a native clematis, and it starts blooming pretty early in the season, and it keeps going and going and going, and then it creates these seed pods, which are attractive all year, and then are also browsed by birds throughout the winter. And what's interesting, what I've started to see, is the color of the flowers varies by sunlight conditions. So toward the sunnier part over there, the flowers have a much more wet, white appearance, and then back here, they tend to be a bit more dark purple. Bumblebees love it. I've seen some hummingbirds explore it.
And tell us again how long this blooms?
It's hard to remember exactly. It started blooming about a month ago, and it'll go into the fall. It'll continue to bloom. And then it's a perennial vine, so it dies back in the winter, and then right away in the spring it starts shooting up again.
So non-woody, so all this growth we're looking at is this year.
Yep, all of this is this year.
And you're saying it's got, in some spaces, fully shaded. It looks like further down there it's like no direct sun.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got these areas here where it's a significant amount of afternoon sun.
Yeah, it seems to prefer this sweet spot right here. What I'm starting to see is that it doesn't prefer too much sunlight, but then it also doesn't thrive as well in full shade.
Full shade.
So it does take some doing to find out where it's happiest.
And what do we have here, Dan?
Okay, so this is an experimental hedge with gray dogwood, and it's a bunch of plantings from seedlings that I got from the Missouri Department of Conservation has a nursery where they will ship you a bundle of at least 10 plants. At the time when I got these, they were 80 cents a piece, and so I planted a row along this fence to create a hedge and as a screen. Once a year I will trim it down to maintain that hedge appearance.
So this is a native dogwood, so it's related to the state tree, the flowering dogwood.
Yeah, it's related, and this is much more of a shrub where it will send out suckers. So it forms colonies.
So it root suckers.
Yeah, it root suckers, which can, in some landscapes, can cause some problems. But if you have an area where you're going to be mowing next to it or creating some sort of barrier for those, it shouldn't be a problem. And also in these conditions where there's not a tremendous amount of sunlight, it seems not to be suckering aggressively. I've only had to pull out one or two suckers here and there.
And flower and fruit.
Yeah, so it has a flower in the spring that is white, and then it forms drupes, although that is one of the disadvantages of forming it into a hedge, is where the drupes tend to form are, what I'm understanding is that naturally they're probably above where I'm trimming this. So we don't get a tremendous amount of fruit from these, but there are, what I have seen is that the foliage attracts a number of different caterpillars. That it seems like there's a number of caterpillars that will feed upon and then actually use the leaves sometimes to form a cocoon.
Very important point. We appreciate you mentioning that. Our recollection is the Cornus genus, which dogwoods are a part, have been recorded to host something over 100 different species of butterfly and moth caterpillars. So yeah, even though you may be gardening with it, that might minimize the flowering and fruiting, still it is an important habitat plant.
Yep. When we moved into this place, this area was all ornamental plantings. It had Rose of Sharon. It had, I mean, it was a carpet of English ivy that was growing very high up the tree there. It was a tremendous amount of English ivy. And so what we've done since then is to replace all of those ornamental plantings with Missouri natives, the only exception being this one remaining non-native hydrangea. And then next to it we have, in contrast, we have some native hydrangea. There's a, yeah, and this is a very long blooming plant. Seems to be very happy right here. There's a lot of pollinators. You can see a bumblebee right now enjoying the blooms on this. There's two, there's another one over here. And they'll spend all day. And if you look closely, there's actually a number of different pollinators that are attracted to this. Some smaller ones as well.
So this is like a savanna, I guess. This is like big trees, but kind of open.
Yeah, right. So it's open, but it also gets quite a bit of shade from this silver maple.
Middle of the day.
Yeah, and really the only time it gets sunlight is in the morning, like it is right now. And there's, if you can see right behind the hydrangea, there's a leatherwood, which is considered a tree, but it's very slow growing, especially in these conditions, but it can tolerate that kind of shade. And then over here, we've tried to establish a colony of star tick seed, which is now in bloom.
So this is a Coreopsis?
This is a Coreopsis. Yeah, it seems pretty happy here. The pollinators are loving it. It's also a very, very long blooming plant. Right next to that we have some garden phlox, which hasn't, under other conditions, can reseed really aggressively, and in this area it tends to stay pretty contained. So the few plantings that we have had haven't really spread out very much, but it's also a very long blooming plant as well.
We see you've many places in your landscape you're using violets as ground covers?
Yes, I think of it as like a green mulch. So I spent the first few years when trying to landscape this property, I was spending a lot of energy trying to pull all of these out. I thought they were weeds. I was told they were weeds, and then I learned that they are plants that are native to Missouri, and they thrive in the clay that we have in our soil in the St. Louis area, and they are beneficial plants for fritillary butterflies and a number of other insects. And in the spring when they bloom, it is a carpet of purple flowers. So I've really embraced our violets as like a natural. I've never planted a single one. I'm just naturally letting them colonize where they like to be.
And what do we have here, Dan?
So this is the tree lawn where I've planted a number of. I've crammed in a lot of different plants into a very small space here. So this is an experimental area. So over here, I a few years ago planted this Shrubby St. John's wort, which you can see is blooming right now. Pollinators loving it. It's a shrub that is fairly compact. It's formal looking, and is nice to look at all year round. And packed in next to it, there's lots of things. There's some oxeye sunflower back here that will bloom in the fall. There's palm sedge. There's some shining blue star, which may or may not be thriving. Here I planted it in the spring here. Actually last fall I planted it here, and it just as an experiment to see what conditions this plant might like. So I might end up moving that somewhere else. But there's also this aromatic aster, which was something I planted and then discovered that as it grows up higher, under these conditions it does tend to flop over as it starts to flower. So this year, in the early summer, I gave it a trim, and hopefully that helps it be a bit more compact. Yeah, it's our native prickly pear, and it a few weeks ago stopped blooming, and you can see each one of these nodes will become bright red fruit as the season progresses. It gets a lot of attention from people walking by who will stop and just look at it and wonder about it, and might even ask about. I've had a handful of people ask to take samples of it, which is really easy to propagate. You just take one of these pads and you can just bury part of it, and it's ready to start growing.
How old is this plant?
I think this is its 5th year. Yeah, this was one of the first plantings that I put in this packed specimen plant area, and it's very slowly colonizing. It does seem to cohabitate pretty well with other plants in this area.
And yet it seems to be forming a bit of a ground cover.
Yeah. So this is a turf replacement installation. Previously this whole area was zoysia, and so what we've done is replace that zoysia with what started as a very small patch of native buffalo grass. And so it started as a very small patch right here in the center, and it has slowly, over the last several years, has extended its area. And I've yet to mow it. This is as high as it gets. It forms just like a really soft, really fluffy, natural ground cover. And once it's established, it does keep weeds away. So it is a monoculture, but it seems very happy here.
So you're not really spending any time managing this space?
Nah. Early on, I think if I were to do it again, I would have spent more time getting rid of the weeds and the zoysia that had been there, because early on that's what I was fighting, was certain weeds were popping up. But now that it's fully established, it does keep those down pretty well.
And this is, would you say, full sun? Is this 6 hours of sun, or?
Yeah, I would say it's about 6 hours, and I know it can do a lot more. What I appreciate about this grass is when everyone else's lawns turn brown in the late summer, this is still green because it has roots that set pretty deep, and so it's able to survive those droughts.
Dan, we really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your landscape with us today.
You're welcome.
Any parting comments about resources or references, or where to go to get plants or assistance?
Well, I might recommend the St. Louis Audubon Society. We have a program called Bring Conservation Home. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's something folks could be aware of about. There's Wild Ones is a local organization that's helped us with our landscape, and
What's your favorite local nursery for native plants?
you know what, I don't have a favorite. I'm impressed by River City Natives and Greenscape.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks again for sharing with us, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Happy planting.
Thanks.